we're Alexander Lawrence, the Portable Infinite. We get like the most interesting people like in these interviews. Today we have the Redd Kross, got Jeff McDonald, Stephen McDonald. They not only do they have a record out, it's their 8th album, self-titled Redd Kross, the Red album. They have a movie that's been showing around called Born Innocent, a documentary about the group. And then we have this, what we're going to be talking about today is a book called Now You're One of Us. It's out October 15th. So get a pre-order in right now, buy 5 copies, get them for your family. And, because this is a good book. This book, it's like as if it was Please Kill Me, but it's about Redd Kross, and there's like 2 brothers that are doing most of the talking. Okay, so that's how I describe it. It's like the whole history, and there's Jeff. Okay, so let me get back. So I'm like I think Jeff is like 6 months older than me, and then Steven's like about 3, but we have like a lot of the similar things. Like we were all Kiss fans. We were into the Partridge Family. We were probably listening to KHJ radio and FM radio in Southern California, and and like other things. I saw Kiss when I was 12 at Anaheim Stadium.
Oh wow, we couldn't go to that concert.
The
Destroyer tour.
Yeah, the Destroyer tour. That was maybe their best gig, as far as I remember. And then so I get to see Ted Nugent opened up, and so like I used to listen, like in 75 I just really got into music. I mean, like some of these interviews we find out a lot of people worked at radio stations and they worked at record stores. Like the McDonald brothers, we were just like, it was like just the big one day we just started buying records. Where did you guys actually buy records? Because I used to buy records at Kmart and was there like a Fedco or something like nearby?
Well, we had a record shop called Muntz Stereos that it was a small chain in SoCal. The main one was in Hollywood that I only know from Wikipedia, but it was actually a stereo shop that had a bunch of
car stereo, audio stereo.
Yeah, and it was audio. In fact, he kind of had this proprietary format that he invented that was like I think it was a predecessor to the 8-track cartridge. He had like a 4-track cartridge or something, but that's all Wikipedia info. But by the early 70s, there was like one store in Hawthorne, and that's where I got Get Your Yayas Out and Killers when I was 5.
All right, yeah. Well, that was another band we were all into. Alice Cooper, really. We used to watch Don Kirshner rock concerts, read Circus magazine, Cream magazine, and
we actually went to a filming of Don Kirshner's rock concert, which a few Los Angelinos are lucky to do.
And and before there was Licorice Pizza in the Warehouse and all these places. I mean, a lot of people bought their records at like some department store. So where you right next to the washers and dryers, there would be like a selection of records right there. So
Sears.
So you went to Sears and bought some records once in a while?
Well, actually, not so much because Sears was discounted, but records were really expensive. The place I used to always look at records was Clark's Drugs. It was just like a drugstore, kind of like a predecessor to CVS. But even in like 1971, records were like $5.99 in those places. They were expensive. So when we found Muntz City Stereo, it was the first place that we discovered like a well-stocked record store that would discount prices. Like I got Hunky Dory by David Bowie, like, maybe a year after it came out for $2.99, which was really cheap.
That's amazing. That's a big difference between our age. That's like a good way to gauge it. That Jeff was conscious of getting a good deal.
Well, I mean, $6 for an album in 1970 is like $40.
Unsustainable. It was unsustainable for an 8-year-old.
Yeah. So like $2.99. It was like it would take a while to cobble enough money to get records, but one after another. I think collectively we built our record collection.
Well, our family was they were very unregulated about our Coca-Cola intake. and they supplied lots of the little green bottles, which you could take back to the local liquor store for 5 cents a piece. And like, 100 bottles of Coke that was probably like 2 weeks worth of um, consuming for the McDonald family as kids. It was just a matter of collecting them and taking them to the liquor store. But that's how we got the White Album in like 1971.
And the White Album was purchased at a grocery market. Like the grocery markets used to sell records too. They always had like 2 bins, but the White Album was purchased at the Boys Market on Hawthorne Boulevard, which is now a Ralph's, but almost the same on the inside.
It's still there. That's amazing that you do that. I would not. I remember collecting the bottles.
So bottles were 5 cents and candy bars were 10 cents back then.
Yeah.
So like that's just give people a perspective. And
well, Abba Zabbas were a nickel. I remember that being that was a good deal.
They were the cheap ones. Second tier candy.
It was taffy filled with peanut butter. I loved them.
So before this book, I mean, there was this book that's more about the LA scene, the John Doe book.
Right.
And, so this is more, but
Under the Big Black Sun, John Doe.
Yeah, I kind of experienced a little bit. I mean, the difference between me and you guys, I probably didn't go to shows till I was 15. So I went to shows at the Cuckoo's Nest, the Golden Bear. I did go to the Starwood, and I saw.
I get to see people who grew up in the OC.
Yeah,
am I wrong?
That's right. Yeah. So and then so I met TSOL and China White when I was still in high school and stuff. So I knew all those guys early on, and but when I got
after you went to Anaheim Stadium to see Kiss was another giveaway.
That's a giveaway, yeah. But the drummer from Guns N' Roses was there too. But there was a lot of people that were.
Steven Adler, I didn't know he was from the OC.
No, but I think he was at the Anaheim Stadium gig though.
Oh, gotcha.
So that, I mean, there was, almost everyone we're going to be talking about was, as far as the OC people were there. So, I mean, like when I met these guys, some of these guys like X and Don Bowles, when I was like 15 or 16, I mean, the old mass scene that was kind of like defunct by then, by 79, 80. Like those guys were they were like 10 years older than me. They're a little scary, as people, like, I was like 15. And if you read this book, that's what you know why they were kind of scary. And but I used to read Flipside magazine. I ended up writing for Flipside magazine a little bit in the 90s, and like so I've heard about Redd Kross. I was with James from China White, and we were hanging out at the Whiskey, and he knew Tracy Lee, so that was like, she's the guitar player from Redd Kross. And that's kind of, I made the connection with, so I kind of see Redd Kross through Tracy Lee, because I had met her a couple times in those early days when I started, all of us would jump in a car and go up, do the track up to Hollywood or whatever. And
right.
So Tracy Lee. So Tracy Lee was in the band for how long? And
she was in the band for she was in the band during our Born Innocent period, our first full-length album. She was the Brian Jones of Redd Kross. She was like the fashion heart and soul of the band.
But she wasn't a founding member like Brian Jones.
No, but that was our first full-length album. We had recorded compilation records and an EP before that, but when we first got back together again and kind of took music more seriously, started recording full-length albums, she was in that version of the band.
But aesthetically speaking, she was Brian Jones, essentially.
Yeah. But reading the book, it seemed like she didn't play on some. So what are some tracks on this record that on
Cease to Exist? That's
Tracy Lee tracks. What I get guitars on a couple tracks.
I can tell you all the Tracy Lee tracks. She plays on Cease to Exist, the Charles Manson cover. She plays on
Every Day There's Someone New.
Did she play on Linda Blair?
Yes, and Every Day There's Someone New.
Every Day There's Someone New. She plays on does she play on Kill Someone You Hate?
Yes, definitely.
What about
1000%?
She plays on I'm so a pseudo intellectual. She
Yeah.
played
Yeah, she's only missing from about
6
4
tracks.
or 5 songs.
What about
Like,
Tatum O'Tott? What about that one? Is she on that one?
that was pure Jeff. Tatum
Okay.
O'Tott was pure
Yeah,
Jeff.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And so was yeah, because there's no real Janet and Tracy tracks. Janet played on Tatum O'Tott, but Janet played on Notes and Chords Mean Nothing to Me, but I think that was all Jeff. Or maybe not.
Okay.
I
So
can't remember. Now I'm
No,
thinking,
Notes and Chords is Tracy. She
yeah.
definitely played on that track. I remember that session.
so getting back to this book and how I found these guys kind of scary, and I
Yeah.
I was not a I mean I remember getting pushed around by some police at a Ramones concert in maybe '82
Yeah.
at the Hollywood Palladium, but
Ramon.
I was not in any
Yeah.
of those riots or that you guys talked about, but I remember meeting you guys in '84 or '85 at Lace. Like it was like one of those John Fleck performance artist kind of things at Lace, and I was just standing there outside, and you guys like parked right in front and popped out of a car, and I go, oh, here's the Redd Kross guy. So,
Oh my God.
and I remember that being positive too. I was going, oh, hello, I know you guys are. It's like and that's when by that time you had like real long hair, and it was like the two-headed monster kind of thing back then,
Right.
And so that was my second kind of Redd Kross experience, because I actually met you guys in downtown, like when Lace used to be on Industrial Street, where it's in those. I don't know if you've been up to those lofts over there.
Right. Yeah. So that was like around the time at the Al's Bar.
Yeah, Al's Bar was nearby.
Right there.
And then I moved, and I kind of left LA area for a couple years. I was in San Francisco in '89, so I was familiar with Jerry Finelli already. So you guys did a show up there with the Butthole Surfers, and so like I was kind of like not even listening to music at the time, but like Redd Kross and Butthole Surfers are playing at the Warfield. Even my cranky old ass is gonna get out of my whatever and show up to the gig. It's like, okay, these guys, it's like some of my favorite bands at the time. It's like, okay,
In your mid-20s.
yeah, I had a mid-20s burnout. Like I was probably about 25 at the time. But
so did we. We had our various burnouts. But that would have been the most psychedelic show. Like Redd Kross and Butthole Surfers in San Francisco was basically, the return to psychedelia in San Francisco.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty great. I thought, and I thought it was a whole tour. That was like a one-off show.
No, it was a small tour.
Oh, is that like a West Coast?
Yeah, we had done one-off shows with them, and also we did a small tour. So I don't recall where that one fit in. I thought that was a one-off.
A small tour. We had played Denver. We eventually ended at the Palladium in Los Angeles. But that was the night before the Los Angeles gig.
Okay, so I had another in 2007. I had another experience. I was at one of the times I was happened to get backstage at the Jimmy Kimmel show, and Patrick Wolf was playing, and Kevin Costner was on the show, and Steven was there too, like hanging out. I think that was what you were kind of doing, A&R or something. Or you worked for Universal or something back then?
I did.
Yeah, and so I remember like we were in the green room and they got free drinks and stuff, and then all of a sudden Patrick Wolf was playing, and they wouldn't let a couple of us go down and watch it. And then so I talked to somebody. I go, hey, this is Stephen McDonald. He invented punk rock in LA, and come on, we should be somehow. I got us in there. I don't know if it was, they just kind of gave up and just threw their arms up. But I remember, do you remember did you go to the Jimmy Kimmel show a lot, or seeing Patrick Wolf, or did you have any connection to him?
Well, a friend of mine was working with him. I wasn't working directly with him, but yeah, a friend of mine that worked at Universal, and and thank you for advocating for the inventor of LA punk.
I mean, I was kind of
I'm saying Redd Kross is a strange band, because when you held up the Big Black Sun book, I realized that that generation of those artists, they were the ones that created us, but we are slotted in between that generation and then the TSOL generation right after us. So we're in that tiny little hair of a time when like maybe it was us and the Descendants, you know, and a couple of other
Yeah.
bands.
Well,
Post mask, but pre-hardcore.
I mean,
Well,
but
he's in Orange County, Jeff. So it's like I think that it was happening simultaneously, just in different places.
yeah, yeah. I mean, well, my take on this book, I mean, I mean, I love all these bands, but it was like 150 people, and only really the Go-Go's and X kind of came out of that. And what to me was more interesting was the bands that came after kind of punk, and that was definitely Redd Kross, Dream Syndicate, and the Gun Club, and who kind of
Right.
mixed up things, and kind of, you know, you guys were kind of doing psychedelic and with garage rock, you know, the Nuggets thing, and you know, Dream Syndicate were kind of into the Bob Dylan and Velvet Underground, and Jeffrey Lee Pierce kind of had this whole blues thing going that nobody was really doing, and you know, the Blasters were back then. I think they were
Right.
You think anybody from No Doubt was at Kiss at Anaheim? Are they old enough?
No, they're too young.
Yeah, they're a little bit younger. They're like later 80s.
They're probably my age-ish, right?
Yeah.
I'm intrigued by this whole Kiss at Anaheim being like ground zero for Orange County hardcore, like the way Queen at the Santa Monica Civic was sort of ground zero for the Germs creation, and a lot of punk rockers from that Please Kill Me, or I'm sorry, Under the Big Black Sun era, they often name check that Queen show, which was like 74 or something. And so like only a few years later it was Kiss in Anaheim, and it was such a big concert. There probably were cheap to get, I don't know, but it seemed that's Andrew. When you said that you were there, and then a lot of people from the Orange County scene were there, I had never thought of that before, and that is an interest. I would love to know. I mean, was Jack Grisham at that concert? Was
Frank Ruffino, China White, you know, some of probably the TSOL.
Right. And was Tony Adolescent there?
Yeah, I think. I mean, definitely Rick Agnew. I think so.
Definitely. Yeah, it wouldn't be No Doubt. No Doubt's ground zero was David Bowie, Madness, and the Go-Go's at
84
Anaheim Stadium. Yeah.
Yeah, a little later.
Because I heard Gwen Stefani talk about that.
Okay, so
going to that concert?
Yeah.
There was it had to be more ska related. Yeah, the Madness.
Yeah.
So we have so Dan Epstein. How did you hook up with Dan Epstein and start writing this book? When did it come about? Like, let's talk about the origins here.
A literary agent reached out to me, Steve McDonald, through Facebook, and tricked me. And he said he wanted to he thought that a Steve McDonald book would be a great idea. And normally I would just like, a lot of times there's like, I usually respond to things, but I might have blown it off if he had said he wanted to do a Redd Kross book, just because. Not that I don't think the Redd Kross deserves a book, but I might have just thought like, oh, that sounds complicated. It sounds like, something, it just seemed complicated to me. And so, but at any rate, I engaged with him. He turned out to be a real literary agent. And then he was very smart. Very soon after that, he switched his attention to it being a Redd Kross book. It was a total bait and switch. He'd already gotten me. And then anyways, one kind of had my trust. Then I was like, okay. And then he introduced us to Dan Epstein. And once we met Dan, I realized that Lee was not jive, as some might say. And Dan was, already friends with a lot of our friends, and and had an impressive resume. Had already written books, and was a good cultural observation, whatever. He was good at observing different things in popular culture and whatever, and a Redd Kross fan. So it was a no-brainer.
And I referred to Redd Kross as the two-headed monster, and you guys, like, as brothers, like, you seem, at least from outward appearance, you seem like you've gotten along really well, like, all these years. Because, like, I have brothers, we've fallen out, and they've come back together, and there's been times where we don't talk to each other, but But you guys had like what I call like get your yayas out gate kind of moment where you were kind of like on the same page, and then all of a sudden that album. I mean, I remember we have having that album as a kid, but we never listened to it. It just sat there. No one, I don't think anyone even listened to it. So what's up about this? Well, that was like the first kind of like falling out a bit over that album.
Oh, yeah, Steve. This is Steve's bitter moment, his first bitter moment.
Yeah.
No, it's something that I for years lobbied for an apology. I think I eventually kind of got one.
Oh, okay. So that kind of standed out. And then I wanted to talk about Uncle Shane. I mean, what was his influence on your guys' musical education? Jeff?
Oh, well, Uncle Shane, he's like 5 years older than me. And for some weird reason, he had discovered Ziggy Stardust. I guess his friends are listening to it. And I go hanging out with them. I got to hear it, and I got very into it. And he loaned us the record, so that started a whole David Bowie. And he played guitar. He had an electric guitar, so he showed me how to play bar chords. And then like the first song I ever learned how to play on bar chords was "Train Kept a Rolling," which he was probably teaching me the Yardbirds version, but I was very aware of the Aerosmith version at the time.
Was so Shane was teaching Yardbirds? That was Yardbirds in Shane's mind.
Yeah. I mean, he was way more classic oriented than I was. I was more contemporary, and that would have been Aerosmith. So yeah, and we had it, and we had an aunt who was just a couple of years older than him, who was heavily into rock music, and she turned me on as a toddler to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and all that stuff. So all of our earliest exposure to cool music was from our aunts and uncle. It was just the way it was, so we just took off, and we continued to play guitar, and we took it to the next level, and we took our love for the Beatles and Rolling Stones to the next level. I think we made a lifestyle out of it.
Our dad Terry is 20 years older than his youngest sibling, so that's why our aunts and uncles, some of the younger ones, were kind of more like older siblings to us. And Colleen, our youngest aunt, she was like a screaming Beatle fanatic. When Jeff was 2, she took Jeff to see the Beatles in San Diego in '65. But I was recently just sort of probing her for more rock and roll stories, and I love this. She saw the Beach Boys at Zodi's on Hawthorne Boulevard and PCH, probably in 1962 when she was 13, and maybe 63. And she said, yeah, it was when they had the cute guy on guitar, David Marks. So it was
Zodi's.
Jeans.
Zodi's was like pre-Kmart. It was a discount department store in Southern California.
Yeah, there was like I think Zodi's became two guys, I think, or maybe they were owned by the same owners or something. So
right.
So you seem like you gleaned a lot of stuff from magazines. So I guess you're reading Rolling Stone, Circus, Cream magazine. Where else did you get your info from?
Well, not so much Rolling Stone magazine. Early Circus magazine, Cream magazine, and we were lucky enough to live down the street from a liquor store that had like a little magazine section. It was like mostly porn, but they had like a few rock magazines. So they would have like the occasional rock scene magazine or punk rock magazine. So we were the only people that bought them. So anytime anything like that showed up at the local rack, we would get that. So that was our internet at the time. It was the information was passed through very, very slowly.
They would continue to stock one or two of them every month because buying them.
Oh, and Circus were really supportive of Kiss and stuff. And I remember when I got Kiss Alive just me and my brother and one friend, Jim Bartanian, in junior high, liked Kiss and stuff. It was like just a total.
Yeah.
Nobody even know who Kiss was. Like in my school, they totally blanked out. Like, so you guys were both had seen Kiss Alive, the show back in '75.
Yeah.
We saw them same year as you, but we saw them in February when they were still doing the Kiss Alive set.
Right. Yeah, so they were recording Destroyer at that time,
Well, you must have recorded Destroyer in the interim between when we saw them and then when you saw them.
right.
And that was late summer or something?
Did people know who Kiss was in your school?
No.
And for Kiss Alive, when we discovered Kiss Alive, when that pretty much was a new record, the only people that knew about it were were high school kids. Like there were teenagers like in high school that knew the record, but not our age group. We were, preteen, and
I was
and,
eight. I was
Steve was 8, and I was
no.
like 11 or 12. So, but I remember reading reviews of the Kiss Alive show that we went to in my friend's high school newspaper, the Hawthorne Cougar. I wasn't there yet. I was still 12. And it was all the teenagers, like the seniors, and were trying to be cool, and they were just talk about how Kiss was lame, and that Montrose blew them off stage.
Oh, you cut off for a second. You were talking about the review in the Hawthorne.
Yeah, my friend's older siblings went to high school at Hawthorne High School, and so I read the reviews in the school paper, and a lot of the seniors were bagging on Kiss. They're saying how great Montrose was.
Okay. So Montrose. So you're talking about that was the review of the concert that we went to.
Yes. But it was a high school review. We were not in high school at the
So
time.
that's not how you found out about them, because we already knew.
No, I went to the show. I was at that same show. I'm just saying, the teenagers who were discovering it were already trying to think that they were, it was like Kiss were already not cool, like the people, the first wave that discovered them.
Even though they showed up to that concert in droves, because it was all teenagers. When we went to that concert, it was before they discovered Kiss. It was before they actually started focusing on that demographic. I mean, Kiss didn't have comic books then. They didn't have action figures. They didn't have board games. They weren't making disco music. They were scary. They were for teenagers. They were
one of my best friend's mom wouldn't let him go to the show with me because he thought they killed chickens on stage.
Just Alice Cooper stories. Yeah, they were from the same ilk.
Did Kiss kind of create a mini gender gap there? Because it seemed like my older brother wasn't really into Kiss. He was into like Black Sabbath and the older hippie bands, and he didn't like Kiss or Queen so much. And people born in the '60s liked Kiss. It seemed like everybody that was like maybe born around 63, 64 seemed to like Kiss, and and the people born in the '50s were still listening to Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, Aerosmith, and the older bands.
Right. Well, Aerosmith, you're wrong with that, though. Aerosmith was a contemporary of Kiss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but the Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin and Cream and all that stuff. Yeah, those were like the people who were born in the late 50s.
Stanley does say in his book, which we just listened to it a second time on tour, he says that Aerosmith were a little ahead of them in terms of like popularity. Like maybe their first record came out 6 months before Kiss's first record, and when Dream On was a little bit of a radio hit probably at the time, and that Kiss opened for Aerosmith early on, and apparently Aerosmith were really rude to Kiss. Oh, I know what it was. The road crew wouldn't move their amplifiers. This classic crap. It's like the kind of shit that like Dinosaur Jr. does to Redd Kross now, and wouldn't move their amplifiers back when they were supporting them, except for Kiss pulled some cool moves that we never did, like where like the roadies like threatened to fucking kick their ass or something.
Yeah, but the Kisses roadies were from New York, and they were obviously born in the 50s because they carried switchblades. So like, that's like they did some, they were into some like warriors, wanderers
Yeah, yeah. I
stuff
was
that's
thinking of
way
that.
before our
I was
time.
thinking of the Warriors. So what about the Runaways? I mean like Sandy West. I went to Edison High School with my brother, like in the mid '70s,
Cool.
and I think like Joan Jett and Sandy West, their first practice was in Huntington Beach. Like she took the
Right.
Oh, I didn't know that.
she took like like 3 buses all the way to Orange County. She lived in the valley, took all the buses, and they practiced in Sandy West's garage, like it's a 2-piece, like when the early Runaways.
That
And
would make sense because it's harder to get the drums onto the bus than it would
yeah,
just to bring her guitar and
Well,
maybe a
the
little
the
PV.
Runaways, without a doubt, were the first punk band in Los Angeles. They were the band that inspired all the people from that book that you held up earlier, The Little Black Sun.
yeah,
Even if people
Even if
didn't
they-
like them, they were influenced by them because they saw that the Runaways can do it and they could do it too.
yeah. They were kind of like a little bit like the Dr. Feelgood is to the English bands, like
Yeah,
and-
exactly. And there were people like the Germs and people like Redd Kross who loved them unironically. But then there was probably the ex people probably just saw them as like, well, if they can play, we can do it too. I'm not sure that they listened to them at this.
Probably like I'm sure they were very snobby about it because it didn't really jive with their poetry reading classes or whatever. But but at the same time they were probably like, shit, they're doing gigs. Why, we
Well, I
should
remember,
be.
well, Joan Jett was very much a fixture in that whole scene. Like anytime you'd ever go to the Whiskey in 1978, or probably even before that, like when she was back from the Runaways, Joan Jett would be there every night. All
But she-
those shows, like
Her apartment on right there.
yeah. She lived. I mean, that's when I went to those early shows. I didn't really realize Joan Jett lived right above the Whiskey, and John
He lived-
lived right by the Starwood, and I knew the Stern brothers from Youth Brigade, and they lived right by Okie Dogs right there and stuff. I knew those guys, but I didn't realize all these guys like lived like right next to the places where they played there.
yeah, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen Joan. I don't think Joan Jett drives. I mean, she was always on foot, so like maybe it was a necessity for some of those people.
Why
Like
would
a
you
lot of people.
drive? I don't understand that, especially after especially after
Yes.
taking 4 buses to Orange County for her first rehearsal. You think she would have at least gotten herself a Toyota Tercel the first chance she
Well,
got.
think about Joan Jett was she is from New Jersey. She's an East Coast person.
Yeah, that's
So like, it's probably the car thing is I would think Sandy West and Lita would definitely have cars because in those days, the minute you turned 16, you had your driver's license and a car.
yeah. But make Joan take the bus.
So
But I think
yeah, go ahead.
I'm saying no. I think you were saying that Lita took a bus to Sandy's for a rehearsal, not Joan.
No, it was Joan.
Oh,
It
it
was-
was Joan.
There
Yeah.
were just the 2 of them, and that makes
Right.
sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
They
before
were kind of
Lita.
like the White Stripes. They were just playing like like they only knew a couple songs like a Susie Quattro or
they probably 48 Crash.
yeah, they kind of played as like a White Stripes version kind of thing. So
I wonder if there's any recording. It'd be great.
you got to ask Joan about that. But so
Yeah.
so there was like a I mean back then there was like this kind of like punk and the old kind of hippie thing going on. And they tried to mix it up. Like the Ramones open up for Black Sabbath. I remember a few of my friends went to that. And then Tom Petty played with Blondie, I think, and I think that went a little bit better because it was like, I mean, Blondie didn't really affect. But at the Ramones gig, I mean, you mentioned it in the book. Like my memory of it, from a few of our friends that went to the show, that the Ramones got booed off stage after 2 songs, and people were throwing shoes at them and stuff. Did you go to the show? I don't know if it was at the Santa Monica Civic or the Long Beach Arena. Like, do you remember that?
Long Beach Arena, I wasn't able to go to the show, but I just figured the Ramones would turn everyone into like huge fans because I was already a big, huge Ramones fan, and I had been a Black Sabbath fan, and I thought their music was very comparable. You know, I mean, it was just like heavy power chord music. You know, and I thought that it was a perfect match, but all the kids that went to it were just talking about, oh, the Ramones suck, they're goofy, blah, 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 blah. You know, it was total humiliation. But I don't think the Ramones actually left the stage. I think they actually completed the show. But there were times I heard that like bottles would be exploding on the cymbals and stuff. I guess we'll never know. The truth lies somewhere in between because now it's like a legend.
I don't remember might have been Marky's book or someone. I remember or someone's documentary. I was surprised to hear the Ramones. They were baffled that they didn't do well with these.
Well, I was baffled that they didn't do well. I thought Black Sabbath and Ramones had a lot in common.
Yeah, but
Sabbath was more of a slow version of what the Ramones were doing.
But
it's like full power chord.
Hang on, Jeff. You were very aware of how indoctrinated that Black Sabbath audience was. You knew the culture was very different than the Ramones culture.
No, but that's why I was shocked because I thought when it came down to it, the Ramones were like the new improved version of what Black Sabbath had become.
Right. So what you imagined was that there would be a complete transformation of the audience.
Yeah.
But the Ramones viewed it like they had no idea that a transformation would even have to happen. They kind of just thought that they were like already on the same page with that audience.
Well, and the Ramones were of that age group though, where those kind of Fillmore East bills happened all the time. When you would have
sure.
You would have a blues artist, folk artist, and rock and roll artists all in the same bill. They grew up with that shit.
Sure, they grew up with like a concert that was Chuck Berry and the Kinks. Sure, but the thing is, I guess it's crazy because that was probably only like less than a decade after that. So it seemed like, yeah, that made sense. But to me, it seems like back then it's like, oh, well, one is from an era that I remember. Another was from another era that was black and white and seems like a million years prior. But I guess it's not the case.
Well, it seems like
it was just a. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think I'm going to get cut off here. So let me send you a new record. Okay, so we got interrupted there. We all did a bathroom break, part 2 here, Portable Infinite. So let's see. Okay, well, let me go back to the one question. Okay, so you decided to form a band. I mean, yeah, part of the. I mean, you were 11 when you started. Like, one time I met, talked to Jeff. I go, wow, like Redd Kross was the first band I saw where somebody was younger than me. I mean, it was usually the original punkers were mostly like 10 years older than some of the goth bands were 5 years older. And then Redd Kross, he's like 3 years younger than me when I saw you guys when you were like, must have been like 12 or 13. And so you didn't think like, having a 11-year-old that was like kind of maybe like child abuse or something?
No, because we grew up with, of course it was the Runaways. The Runaways were only a few years older than us, but also my, growing up in the 70s, one of my best friends' sister was an insane Osmonds fan. So I was used to, it was normalized, the idea of little kids playing instruments in rock bands, but it was just like part, it's Osmonds and the Runaways.
Well, the Jacksons too, but the Jacksons,
yes. Yeah.
But as it turns out, it was child abuse.
Yeah, it was. I guess.
Yeah, but all those other bands had like some kind of parents kind of involved in the band or something. You got
older siblings. No, but I think that's another thing. Like the Partridge Family, like seeing, like we weren't fortunate enough to actually, see the Cowsills so much later. But the Partridge Family were the Cowsill, the TV version of the Cowsills. And, you know, they were in a garage, little kids on tambourines and people playing basses that were as large as them. And, you know, kids, and it was just, you know, that just those images, those ideas seemed very doable to me, at least. So it was never a thing that Stephen was like, you know, that he was only 11 when we started. I always thought it was an attribute.
Anything to add, Stephen?
What's that?
Anything to add on that?
Well, I'd say Partridge Family, once again, child abuse. But I mean, well, no, we thought it was a gimmick and a novelty, and that we were like willing to exploit to its fullest potential.
And possible.
What?
And possible because of those early exposures. Not just a novelty and whatever, it was also impossible. I think other kids our age didn't even think that they could ever be in the bands because they were the kids.
About me doing it was a novelty to outsiders, and we would exploit it. But yeah, seeing other children do it, now we know that, you know, Michael Jackson was, you know, it was what do you call that? It was, you know, whatever. Oftentimes there was harsh punishments involved in their grooming, so to speak. But regardless, you know, look, it's like when you're a kid, look, every year when I would close my eyes and make a wish and blow out the birthday candles, I would always wish that I was like the TV show Bewitched. I would always wish that I had magical powers, but that I looked and acted exactly the same way. And okay, so in the real life, that's never going to happen. But as a little kid, you view rock stars as having basically the same magical powers, that they have, no one's going to say no to them. They get to do whatever they want to do. And I think that people still hold on to that fantasy. I mean, that's why we we love famous people and we put them on a pedestal. We imagine that they have magical powers, or they at least are powerful. And so it makes total sense that we were attracted to this idea of doing this. And not to mention that creatively we were inspired by these musicians. We loved what they did. So there was like, it was only win-win. There was no downside. It was like, of course we would try to do this. It just wasn't until we heard about the Runaways and that Kim Fowley was promoting them as like these teenage wonder girls that we even thought for a second that you didn't have to possess the, you know, the secret knowledge that people like Jimmy Page and John Bonham possessed. We suddenly realized, oh no, you can be just a Suzi Quatro fan that gets on the bus and down Huntington Beach to jam with a drummer, that mere mortals can actually do this. And we would always think, like, isn't it amazing that you're getting such a head start on this, Stephen? Like, when I was at the Kiss concert in 1976, they gave out this badge that said, I was there. That was their big marketing thing for everybody that was at the concert. I was there. I believe it was the first concert. And I remember thinking, yeah, I was there too. And I'm 8 years old. Amazing. And we would always kind of go, isn't that amazing? And yeah, so, you know, we liked, and also not to mention the 70s, that was a big deal on TV and film. The precocious child, the precocious adolescent, like that was a character that was always in our favorite movies. Things like, you know, Alice doesn't live here anymore, or even The Exorcist. I mean, in the first 5 minutes, she's really precocious. She's like this fun little teenage, preteen. And, you know, and I think that was, you know, that was all these things we were trying to emulate, you know, and that's, I was trying to be a precocious little kid.
Yeah, there was kind of a youth movement films with Tatum O'Neal and and Harold and Maude, and then all the way up to John Hughes films in the 80s. So like
great writers for snappy, witty dialogue. I didn't possess that.
What about Black Flag? I mean, why weren't you guys ever on ST? And Black Flag, if people don't know, they kind of took Redd Kross under their wings. It was kind of like a junior band. You played at Pollywog Park. Was Greg Ginn kind of your Kim Fowley, kind of like helping with your career way more than these movies and other stuff we talked about? Did Greg Ginn really like enable you? He was the Kim Fowley. Go ahead.
No, he would no. But I found Greg Ginn, but no, they were just very cool. They were very into like it growing a scene, and they saw the value in what we did. I mean, we just were able to join their club of like, there was just a small group of people, and their band was like the center of it. And we went and they invited us to one of their rehearsals, and then they gave us their instruments and told us to play, and we played, and then we just started doing our first real shows with them. But it wasn't like a mentorship. It wasn't a mentorship like a Kim Fowley where there was any kind of involvement in the creation of image or anything. They were just facilitated our entrance into playing nightclubs.
Except for they were probably in the room when we named our band, and they might have they might have weighed in. Because we were called the Tourist originally. In terms of like the Kim Fowley exploiting the teenager, that we did that ourselves. We very much did the only reason we didn't make a record for, and the main reason we didn't make a record for SST was because we got signed before they were actually to another record label, before SST was actually a real record label putting out other bands' music. In fact, if anything, they were probably annoyed that we got signed because they weren't getting signed. And Robbie Fields, as far as I know, wasn't trying to put out Black Flag records at that time, but he wanted to put out a Redd Kross record. And I'd also like to add that, yes, we did all of our first shows with them, but they were also doing their first shows. They had just started playing nightclubs. We got to play some of their first ever nightclub shows with them.
Well, what about the church, though? I mean, you guys were, Hawthorne, I'm guessing that it was sort of more suburban LA, so you're living in tract homes and stuff. And when you go down 3 miles down the road, you guys go to the church, and it's almost like, people living in an RV like today, like it's like these guys are, 2 seconds from being homeless, kind of almost. It's like it's a big abandoned church. There's people living there, practicing there. What was your kind of take on the whole church vibe when you first?
Well, I don't think there's anyone. Well, there were a couple of people, that were 2 seconds from being homeless, but a lot of the people were just living that lifestyle by choice, that kind of just gritty artistic, existence. And so it was just kind of interesting to watch it from the suburbs. I mean, because I was by no means inspired to like leave my parents' house and share bunk, with these people who are living without a shower, and living off junk food. But they chose to do it, and it was fun. It was fun to kind of live vicariously through them, through the various people who were living that lifestyle. But not all of us were. I mean, some of us were high school age and living with our parents, like Janet Housden and all the other kind of people that were South Bay first generation punk rockers were also people who lived with their parents. So it was just a small group of people that actually lived at the church.
I mean, I don't think I ever really thought, I had no wherewithal to think like, who is here by choice and who's here because they're from a broken home. I
can tell you right now. I mean, I won't say names, but it's easy to know that now.
Now I could.
Yeah.
But at the time, the whole thing was just like, to me, older, scary people.
Yeah, me too. But they were nice, though. They were super nice and super inviting, but it was scary. Yeah, I mean, when you're 11 and 14 and, and these people are in their mid 20s, or
And
pushing mid-20s. You don't really, I mean, we had music and we had the kind of in common. We had music and we had the fact that we were into this kind of like outlaw culture together. So there was something to connect us. Otherwise, in a normal situation, there would be no way which you would be able to cohabitate with people in the age span that we were dealing with.
Yeah,
But
we
it's
had
because we were all kind of, it was all like, if you liked punk rock or anything weird from where we came up, you're a complete and total freak. And it was even worse where a few miles west in Hermosa Beach, because the cops would try to get harassing people. So for us high school kids, we were just being harassed by kids who were into classic rock, and those guys who are already on their own, they were being harassed by the police. So it was just kind of made it fun.
they were baiting the police, and they were interested in creating that sort of narrative. It
Yeah,
seemed.
I mean, it wasn't like there was definitely, it was kind of like, rebel with the cause.
Yeah, they were smart enough. I mean, we had no idea. I didn't know that, I didn't know that Greg Ginn was a UCLA graduate, and I wouldn't have known what that meant. And I think maybe Raymond was too. Chuck Dukowski, we knew him as Gary. When he handed me his Flying V bass at that first rehearsal and said, "Show us what you guys can do," he was Gary. And then within a few months, he was Chuck Dukowski, which is a reference to Charles Bukowski. I didn't know who the fuck Charles Bukowski was. It wasn't until years later when I think back to the fact that I was like hanging out with dudes that were into Charles Bukowski. And Raymond Pettibone was a heavy dude. He's a heavy hitter. And the subject matter of his artwork was always intriguing. I could tell it was funny, but it was scary and baffling. Pictures of cops molesting children, and
pop culture icons and hideous situations.
Yeah, and then with these like really caustic, cryptic, funny text that went over my head, but everyone around me would laugh when they'd read it, and I'd be like, "Yeah, it's funny." And I remember one time, like, and Raymond was always an intense guy. I mean, he was always really nice to us. But I remember one time he was wasted, and there were all these broken beer bottles in this bathroom sink, and he just like put his hands in it, and it was like bloody, and it was shocking, and he was just wasted and just having a good time or something. But these kinds of moments would happen, and it was kind of intense thing for me, an intense peer group to try to fit in with. But something I will also say is, like, many years later when I played with Keith Morris, I got more insight into what that world was like for the adults. And, Keith Morris was probably doing tons of cocaine or whatever drugs he get his hands on. And he didn't flaunt that around me. I didn't know.
No, none of them did. None of them did drugs around us, except for they would drink beer. But yeah, if there was a cocaine thing happening with that group of people, the adults in that group of people, and they never, to their credit, they never exposed us to it.
What about the whole idea that Greg Ginn was kind of a pothead and was kind of a deadhead? Is that true?
He wasn't. When we first met Greg Ginn, he was not into pot at all. He was 1000% didn't do anything that we knew of. And the Grateful Dead fascination happened a few years later.
Yeah, that was more mid-'80s.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
that's like,
they were purging themselves of all of the tropes of arena rock when we met them, and they were in
the 70s when we first started. It was still the late 70s when we first started hanging around with those people. So all that whole culture was just wrapping up.
They had just cut their hair. In fact, I just saw a picture this morning on social media of Greg and Gary in the studio in 1978 as Panic. and they had like surfer locks, but they had the same guitars that they had when we first saw them.
That was probably only months before we first hung out.
So like we saw them right after they gave themselves their first punk rock haircuts, for instance.
They actually went through the image when they finally created their image.
So those guys all went to college, mostly UCLA,
And they were from South Bay, hippie culture, living near the beach. Yeah, so it's a whole different mindset of like what we would even imagine. We didn't even know what it was.
So Black Flag and the Circle Jerks and Fear probably, and even the Germs. I mean, they kind of like clubs would have punk rock, and then there would be a little Damage, and they wouldn't have the bands back. They would
Right.
A lot of the original, and the Whiskey even closed for a bit, there in the 82 or something. And then things kind of moved to Chinatown. So there was a Hong Kong cafe and Madame Wong. So what was your take on that whole scene? I mean, you definitely played Hong Kong cafe a few times.
Well, that's where we first played shows. So that's kind of the beginning, actually. I mean, I think the very first stage of punk rock was just the Mask. And then the Whiskey started having little things here and there.
Starwood.
The Starwood. And then, but those things were going on they were going on simultaneously as the Chinatown thing happened. And that just happened to be where we got to play first. When Black Flag booked their first show at the Hong Kong Cafe.
Yeah, but some of the places like Club 88 and the Troubadour, the Bags played at the Troubadour, and then they were never invited back because like there was a little damage.
Oh, I guess the Bags had some kind of thing where they got banned from the Troubadour. Yeah. But the Troubadour, I don't really remember them booking punk bands until later into the 80s. So maybe they had booked some stuff.
They tried to do it.
Yeah, they might have booked some stuff in the late 70s. But the thing about the Troubadour is we were playing there in the 80s. And even then, in the early 80s, they still had like a 70s culture going on in there. Not to mention like the wood paneling that they still have, but they used to have the tables all the way up to the stage, even in the 80s. And you had to beg them to get rid of the tables because it was still like the era when like John Lennon would go see Anne Murray or whatever at the Troubadour. And so punk rock definitely would not work in their late 70s, 80s culture at the Troubadour. But yeah, the Chinatown thing happened, and it was really exciting. I mean, that's where we played our first shows. We opened for Black Flag. We opened for the Germs there. We played with the Middle Class. We played with the Bags. We played with all of our favorite bands pretty much from the LA scene at the Hong Kong Cafe within like a 6-month time frame.
And so you weren't, like, you never did a record with SST, not even a compilation, but you were on the Siren that Siren compilation, and Posh Boy saw you at one of those Hong Kong cafe shows and he had already done he had done the Beach Boulevard record. He had done the Rodney Volume 1, and then he thought, okay, Redd Kross, this is like the next place to go. Right.
Well, Rodney Volume 1 wasn't until after. The Siren was he had done 2 records. He did the F Word live record, which we liked, and then he did Beach Boulevard, which was a little bit of like a mini hit. It was definitely kind of inspired probably all of the first wave of Orange County bands. And then the Siren was going to be the next record, and we were excited because we thought that it was going to be like the next Beach Boulevard, but he didn't really have the simple tones, and he didn't have the same kind. Like we would have fit on Beach Boulevard, which I think we eventually were on some like later version of Beach Boulevard, but the Siren was just us and 2 San Francisco bands, one called Spit and Teeth and one called 391, I think. And those bands were both older than us. They were probably a bit more eclectic. They didn't really fit into that same poppy punk thing that Posh Boy was known for at that moment. So it was kind of it was a letdown for us when it came out. But then what he ended up doing was within 6 months' time, he pulled our 6 songs off that EP and issued it as its own standalone 12-inch EP.
Right. So in the 70s, I mean, there was the whole idea of the latchkey kid, because like a lot in Southern California, a lot of our parents worked and stuff. My stepfather worked at Fedco in Costa Mesa and Cerritos, and he was one of the managers. And so like our parents were like, we'd come home from school and our parents wouldn't be there because they would be at work, because like both parents worked and stuff. Did you relate to the whole idea of the latchkey kid at all, or does that come into?
Well, our mom didn't work till later, so we didn't have it. But I did go to school with kids who literally wore keys around their neck, tied with yarn, like because both their parents worked. That was a thing.
Our mom
But
did work in our childhood, though. She did off and on.
briefly, yeah, off and on. But I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have a doctor's appointment, so it's after 1. I have to go. I'm gonna have to sign off right now. So
Okay.
it was great. It was great chatting. You guys can continue without me. I'm sure Stephen knows my story as well.
Okay. Thank you,
thanks
Jeff.
a lot.
Thank you, Jeff.
See you later. Bye.
Okay. So here so
you want to continue with me?
Yeah, I got a couple more questions here.
Okay.
And they're more Stephen McDonald questions anyway. So what was your take on Jeffrey Lee Pierce had a review of Redd Kross real early on. What did you think of Jeffrey Lee Pierce? I mean, like I said, like punk happened, and some of that. I mean, the punk bands were good, but the Go-Go's became like a pop band, and X kind of like broke out a little bit, out of the scene. They kind of went on and kept almost like a classic. They're almost like a bar band, kind of more like the Blasters or something. And then but a lot of those bands were just kind of angry Chuck Berry music, like sped up, like the Dickies were doing like a sped up version of Nights in White Satin, or Sit on My Face Stevie Nicks. There was nowhere for that music to go really. And stuff. What were you gonna say?
When you said "Sit on My Face," Stevie Nicks, I said the Rotters.
Yeah, right. And what was I gonna say? Okay, so so there was once that first thing of punk rock kind of like ended a bit in 81, 82, maybe even before. I mean, there was like Redd Kross, there was kind of doing stuff. Dream Syndicate kind of came along, and there was this Gun Club, which was kind of doing. I mean, they were a little bit similar to the Blasters, because it was a kind of influence on Americana. But Jeffrey Lee Pierce had this whole literary thing going on. What did you think of Jeffrey Lee Pierce and his whole trip?
Well, I mean, I was biased because, well, first off, the literary stuff would have gone right over my head. And also these people were fans of a lot of like great rock journalists, like what was the guy almost famous?
Lester Bangs.
Lester Bangs. Like Jeff was reading Lester Bangs when he was 9 years old. Rock Scene magazine and stuff. Like I didn't ever read the articles. I mean, maybe Jeff was more like 11. I just would always look at the pictures. It wasn't until later that I became a little bit more of an analytical, literary type of person. But I was biased about Gun Club because Jeffrey Lee Pierce was a rock journalist before he was playing in his bands, or at least that I knew of. And he wrote for Slash magazine. And the first review that we ever got was in Slash Live Review. And it was written by Jeffrey Lee Pierce, who we knew a little bit because he would hang out down at the church. Keith was friends with him, and he was doing an article on the church and whatever. And he kind of slagged us off a little bit. I mean, someone had to explain to me what those fancy adjectives meant. And one of the things he said was, I don't exactly remember the entire review, but it was something like, I would sing lead on a few songs where I put my bass down and I would scream at the top of my lungs and try to be like Penelope Houston or something. And he would say, I can't really take a cherubic 12-year-old rolling around on the floor seriously. And I remember asking someone, what does cherubic mean? And they're like, oh, like a chubby little angel. And, and I was very sensitive about my weight. And as I just saw red, I was like, whoa, okay, this is war. But fuck that guy. And that's how I felt about him. And it continued on. So by the time the gun club started, I was always competitive with other bands anyways, just the nature of being in a band, and I'm like bad at that part of it. And so when he started his band, I was like, oh, that's the guy that called me chubby. Fuck him. And I thought it was ironic because he was a little chubby himself. And so and then later now I look at it and I think like, oh, it was just his inner child. He was having a hard time with it, and he was probably it, jealous that I was up there doing it, and he was just writing about it. And not that I shouldn't say just, but knowing that he had it in him to do it, and for some reason he wasn't doing it. And he might have saw me, and it might have mocked him a little bit. And so it came through in his writing, perhaps, as I'm projecting that. But at any rate, so that's an unfair that one's unfair because I was very kind of like biased about him. But it was funny years later when I was in the band Off, and Keith Morris made Jeffrey Lee Pierce the subject of an Off song called Jeffrey Lee Pierce, and it was all about how great the first Gun Club's record is, and he was holding him on this pedestal and going on about what a brilliant man he was. And I remember always thinking that was funny that I was in this band that was doing that, when that was, the feelings I'd had at a younger age.
Yeah, Gun Club didn't really they weren't very popular in LA ever, but he was on the cover of the New York Rocker, and he kind of that's where it kind of started, the Jeffrey Lee Pierce legend. And then in Europe, he's kind of taken as a big band, in a way, like, oh, he's like the Americans' answers to Nick Cave or something, but in LA, it's not even, it's very small.
Well, because they were referencing certain obscure things of Americana, and they had some kind of working knowledge of it. And Europeans probably saw it as very exotic. I don't know, but yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know where I was going with that.
Okay. Yeah. He was he was a literary guy. It's hard to get. Oh, okay. We got like 10 more minutes.
In a second ago, hang on. So now remember, you were kind of talking about that early 80s, and you started bringing a Dream Syndicate, and then there was some Americana stuff. Yeah, I mean, then there was eventually which coalesced into what they called the Paisley Underground. The press were calling Paisley Underground. All the bands that were sort of referencing the Burrito Brothers and late 60s Birds. You had like the Long Riders, and you had Green on Red, and then of course the Bangs, and 3 O'Clock or Salvation Army, bands that were kind of referencing 60s music, but through a punk rock filter, or that could play alongside punk bands. Like we did, there's a flyer out there of us playing the Cafe de Grand with Black Flag and the Bangles. I think they had just changed their name. They might have still been the Bangs.
Did you feel part of the Paisley Underground? Did you feel like any kind of relationship at all?
Yeah, I mean, we played their parties. Like Spock Dean, who just recently passed away. She was sort of like one of the sort of connective touchstones for that scene. She had an apartment on Crescent Heights that was called the Spock Hotel, and Steve Quinn and Vicky Peterson and John Napolitano lived there together. They were all roommates when I first would hang out there, and then Redd Kross played in the living room. But we didn't. We played gigs with those bands, but like we weren't invited to be on the Rainy Day compilation record. We weren't necessarily considered like core members of that scene. We didn't subscribe to all the tenants. I couldn't name all the members of the Byrds in 1968, for instance, but at the same time, we were considered, somehow brothers in arms, and and we were given a free pass for as much as we didn't have a perfect Brian McLean hairstyle. We were acknowledged as weirdos that loved weird rock and roll the way they did. And then like whatever, like Sid Griffin from the Long Riders, for instance, played I forgot about this. Jeff just reminded me. He played harmonica on Teen Babes from Monsanto. As where the Peterson sisters also sang on Teen Babes from Monsanto, but they didn't we couldn't credit them because at that time they were already signed to a major label, and major labels used to be really weird about I guess nowadays a feature is a very common thing, but at the time it could have been a hassle, so we just didn't.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't really talk about the whole book. I mean, I want people to like discover the book for themselves. I mean, we're almost getting to the point in the book where you come out with Born Innocent, but there was this character D that came up. I mean, like I think of that time. I mean, the previous scene, the glam scene. I mean, there's these people like Sable Starr and Laurie Maddox. I mean, I think they were there because they were like 14 or 15-year-old girls that wanted to get into the because I remember when I tried to get into Mabuhay Gardens and I was 17 and they wouldn't let me in, so I had to borrow someone's ID. So there was a factor of being like you had to be like 18 to get in some of these clubs. So I think girls back then were trying to appear older and stuff, and that kind of came along with getting hit on by older guys and stuff. So when this D character comes into the book, and there was other things in the punk rock scene. The circle I hung around with, like they were all, I guess they were all 18 by then. I was a couple years younger than a lot of these guys. They were all in college and 18, and my friends Mike Pendleton and Dave Harding and some others, and they had relationships with some of the older people on the scene, like these people that were like around 30 and that were similar to D and stuff. And so there were some people that were like, that weren't all our age into the punk rock scene, that were kind of like lurking around, that were, that are now like probably almost 80 and stuff, because we're all like around 60 and stuff. And D kind of I think kind of reminds me of that time, because there was like there was people like having sex with people that were a lot older than them. It was kind of a normal thing in the 70s. I don't think there was like, the whole kind of thing that around Laurie Maddox and Sable Starr that people kind of get negative about, or the relationship that you had. I think that was quite of a normal thing in the 70s, I think. What do you say about that?
What do I think? I think it was more normalized. I think that nowadays what people call pedophilia would have been considered eccentric taste. But I personally think it's really annoying when people label someone that's sleeping with a 16-year-old as a pedophilia, because I think that actually takes away from it denigrates the real victims of true pedophilia. A 16-year-old is very different than someone that hasn't gone through puberty yet. And so, whatever. It's difficult to look at through these things through the lens of 2024. And I don't want to get, and a lot of it I'm not very articulate about as well. I don't really know Jeff would have more to say on the Laurie Maddox story. I'm not so familiar with the details of the 70s groupies. I think she was with Jimmy Page, for instance, I think. And, and I think she's one of the ones who have no regrets. It doesn't say that, that she was anyway, she doesn't talk about power dynamics being off, and she doesn't regret her time with Jimmy Page, from my understanding. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I remember Rodney Bingenheimer. Wow, we've already gone another. I remember that he always had a crush on Brooke Shields when she was 13, and no one thought they just thought it was eccentric. Oh, Rodney. Like Debbie Harry would say, "Oh, I'm too old for you, Rodney." And on the air, it was a different time. And it's really weird for us now to try to view that time through the lens of 2024 maybe. And I do think that, people have their heads screwed on better now about it for sure, and mental health is much more of a thing than it was then. It's true, but also my situation was rarely ever considered. I was with a woman that was in her mid 20s when I was 12, and the power dynamic was way off there too. When I thought I was sort of in control of a situation, it wasn't until much later that I realized now she had all the control, all the power. And so, I don't know. But whatever. It's what happened. I survived it. It's unfortunate that she manipulated me to the level that hurt a lot of people, because I ended up running away from home because of her for 3 months. And she just wasn't well. It's really unfortunate that I intersected with someone that have so boundaryless and willing to take her obsession to such an intense level. But I guess it's a cautionary tale. It was the downside of my precocious, otherwise kind of magical experience in the early scene.
So the book, let me remind everyone, the book's called Now You're One of Us. It's coming out October 15th. Everyone buy a copy. They got records. Go to redkross.com. Check out their music. They just finished the tour. They played the sold out show at the Lodge Room. They got a new record out, and the film Born Innocent will probably show up in theaters early next year. So check that out. So anything else? Like how do people get in contact with you? Just go through redkross.com. Is that where they are you gonna
I'd just like to add that the new album is our self-titled album, Redd Kross, on in the Red Records. And if you're going to check out one thing of us for your entrance point, should be that record.
Yeah, check out the new record and buy a bunch of copies of it. Thanks again, Steve, for talking to me. That's we've been going a long time. Thank you for your time, and thank you.
Enjoy. Thanks.
God bless. God bless. You're still with us.